Three, two, one. Hello and welcome to this Care Leaders Network sector commentary conversation with Samantha Guest. Samantha, could you give me a quick introduction about yourself and then also about Ridouts, the company that you work for?
Certainly. Hi, everyone. My name is Samantha, as Simon has just said, and I am a lawyer with Ridouts Professional Services. For those who don't know us, we are a law firm who specialise in health and social care, and we act solely for the providers. So that means that we're available to anybody within the sector who may have any issues with regulators or beyond that scope.
Got you. Perfect. And what was it you were looking to talk about today?
So one of our primary roles at Ridouts is dealing with a regulator by the name of the CQC, or the Care Quality Commission, who I'm sure many people listening to this will have some experience with. And what I'm wanting to discuss with you today is a new framework which they have put forward, which basically will alter quite significantly the way that they are deciding to assess providers within the sector.
Great. Okay, perfect. So my probably relatively limited understanding of this, and I guess just to put this in context for the audience, is to say that the CLOEs, the key lines of inquiry, and the domains of safe, responsive, caring, effective, and well led, well remembered.
Well done. Well done.
Will all be done away with, and the individual kind of subheadings that sit within the CLOEs that sit within those 5 domains will be canned basically in the not too distant future. So my understanding is also the fact that it would be 2 insights that I've certainly learned about this is the fact that firstly it was going to happen sometime relatively soon, and now it's probably not going to, because I get the impression that the CQC are kind of not quite on target with their own expectations, which I think has had a bit of a ripple effect. And then also as well, my understanding is that they're trying to, I guess, homogenize regulation, so that the CQC, who regulate all health and social care organizations, have a standard approach, if you like, across all of them to try and create continuity, which in some ways I can see why that's a brilliant idea. In some ways, I don't know how it's going to work, and I'm a little bit worried. So I'm really interested to have this conversation with you as well, because I guess at the moment there's only so much that we can talk about because there's a little bit of the unknown, but equally as well, we've got some insights and some things that we should probably share, and just share some ideas and get I guess share what's possible at this stage, and it'll probably turn into a bit of an ongoing commentary as things evolve and we learn more.
Very accurate. I mean, unfortunately, it's a situation where there are probably more questions than answers at this point. And you're very correct in your discussion about the CQC being rather behind schedule. It started in August 2022. There was a game plan for this is when it's all going to start. We're here, we're ready to go. And there have definitely been teething issues and discussions that maybe weren't had that should have been had before they decided to kind of release this new framework.
Makes sense. There's a lot of, I guess there's always going to be a certain amount of tension from a provider to a regulator perspective. That kind of natural tension is always going to be there. I feel like at the moment there's probably heightened tension because of, I guess, the evolution and some of the unknown at the moment. So what do we know is like what's changing specifically at the moment that's maybe causing some of that tension?
Yeah, certainly. I guess one of the biggest parts that we at Ridouts are kind of a little bit concerned to be a bit of a tension area is the draft inspection reports, or the inspection report process. I mean, at the moment, providers are very aware that they are subject to inspection, and the CQC may turn up, and as a result of that, there is an inspection report produced. The issue we have with this new strategy is that they appear to be moving away from doing inspections and hoping to continuously be assessing a provider. Now, what that means is that a provider essentially always has to be on guard and prepared to provide information at the drop of a hat, which does happen now. I would be misleading if I said that didn't occur. But the issue is that it's now going to be a lot more pivotal to what the public is reading on the CQC website. It appears that the CQC are aiming to limit inspections for resource purposes and in the hope of not leaving significant gaps between when a provider is inspected, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, some of our clients have gone years without inspection. And so as a result, they've either significantly increased in that period or there's been a decrease in their service. And so it's very jarring for the public to kind of see somebody go from outstanding down to good, or from requires improvement up to good. So there's a positivity in kind of constantly assessing somebody, but the question is, how are they going to be doing that? And is it going to be a process in which providers are either aware that they're being assessed at that point in time, or B, actually a part of the process if the CQC are choosing to do off-site only inspections, for example? So is a provider even going to be aware that something is going on in the background? So I'm kind of forward-tracked a little bit there, and I'll break that down a touch more. So with the CQC deciding not to do consistent inspections and aiming to do a balance between what they're calling off-site and on-site inspections, they're aiming to reach more people, is their wording. They're trying to become more public focused in the sense of being able to get information and insights from those who maybe tend to be forgotten in what is the current inspection process. So they're talking about having discussions with third parties such as healthcare professionals who might come into homes. The obvious ones are service users and their families and people associated with the service. They have divided or devised what they're calling evidence categories. Now, as a lawyer, evidence automatically gets my ears kind of pricked up. And I think as a provider, it's going to have that effect if the CQC continue down this trajectory. In essence, there are 6 evidence categories that the CQC are going to be utilising to decide whether an on-site inspection is required or whether they can produce a report based on the information they've obtained behind closed doors. Makes it sound a bit too shady. It's not closed doors, but it's information which they've managed to obtain either through a third party, through phone calls with the provider, through staff, all of that sort of information. My primary concern when I look at these evidence categories is that even though the CQC talk about each category being weighted evenly, and if I name those categories for you, they're people's experience with health and social care services, feedback from staff and leaders, feedback from partners, observations. It gives you an idea that they're trying to spread the information across all relevant portions of a provider's service. But the reality is a lot of the information obtained from those categories is people's third-party opinion or bias or unfounded and potentially ungrounded statements, which might be weighted unreasonably heavily against solid information that a provider could outwardly provide to the CQC. Does that make some sort of sense?
So my interpretation of what you've explained, so if you look at the current regulatory set of circumstances where we have 5 domains and a handful of, there's plenty of Chloe's for each one, key lines of inquiry for under each one of those headings, which is very, very specific. And well, it aims to be specific. There is, of course, grey area, but there's there's a case to be made that the current framework seems to be more objective and aims to be kind of fact based, whereas what you're suggesting is that it seems to be kind of perspective and narrative based. So I guess the risk there would be that it would be maybe more subjective in its nature, almost naturally, because of the almost the framework itself. Am I understanding that correctly, at least from your understanding of things?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I probably should have said this earlier. At the moment, it's very subject to interpretation, because the information that the CQC is releasing is fairly intermittent and comes at kind of intervals that are very spread apart. So you're trying to formulate this picture to get an understanding of what this might look like, but it's all coming in bits and pieces. But I would completely agree with your kind of summary of what was just discussed. That is the primary concern at the moment, is that we are potentially going towards an avenue in which the CQC are placing a lot of reliance on information from parties that can be affected by matters beyond a provider's control. So are you really getting an accurate perception of the service to publish to the public?
Yeah, I can people's perspective is valuable, of course it is, and people's experiences and things like that are always going to be valuable. So it's important, I guess, to state that it's not that it's, if our interpretation at this stage is correct, let's say, that the approach doesn't have merit. I guess there's the pros and cons have to be weighed up, and of course the devil's going to be in the detail. As things evolve, we might get presented with a set of circumstances where we're then looking at things maybe a few months down the line, and they've given it due consideration, and they have rationale and kind of structure that maybe overcomes some of these things that we both of us seem to kind of have shared concerns about, if you like. So I guess that's one of the things, having this type of conversation at this juncture at where we're at. This, of course, this is going to be an evolving set of circumstances. So I guess I don't want to take kind of too much of a negative stance. I've got my concerns, but it's going to be how this plays out is something that's we're gonna have to be patient around how it does play out. I think one of my thoughts is that the regulators have to evolve. The social care sector is in a state of flux, and I mean, really, this is the biggest change in regulation in England, certainly since we switched from the C-Sky methodology, which I'm just trying to think now. It was a while ago. It was before my time in social care. I've been in the game for 7 years now, and I know it was it predates me by a reasonably significant margin. And I can imagine that at the time there were lots of people going, what are these key lines of inquiry? And this is going to be a big change, and this is going to cause some concern and some frustration and things like that. So
change is always unnerving, and I think that's the reality of this situation, right? Change, when you're so used to something, is unnerving. And it's correct, we can't say this is a positive, we can't say this is a negative right now. We don't know enough to be able to make that conclusion. I think if I was to summarize my perspective, I think that what they are wanting to bring forward, so the fact of getting the public more involved, making sure you actually have information from those who are engaged with a service before you pass judgment, is really important, because they are the people who the service is for. And so it is essential that we have that information and we're able to pull that through to a public assessment of a service. I guess probably one of the cruxes and one of the biggest details that are missing for us at this point is the challenging process. So right now we have factual accuracy comments. If you're not happy with a draft inspection report, you get 10 working days to basically produce challenges to the comments that are contained. And we do a lot of work in that area. It's one of our areas where providers do feel like they haven't had their voice appropriately heard through the inspection process and do want to challenge what the CQC are putting down. Our concern at the moment is that the drive from the CQC with this new framework to streamline their process has led them to making comments about how they feel the current process results in long-winded and maybe unnecessarily long inspection reports, which are maybe not meaningful to the public that they're addressing. What
Sure.
we find and what providers are finding is that at the moment, those inspection reports are still not accurately reflecting the service that they provide and are still painting a picture that they don't feel represents them as a service. So if the CQC are opting to streamline their process, our big question is, well, what does it mean when a provider wants to challenge that? What is this process going to look like? And are we still going to be afforded that opportunity? Which I'm sure we will. They need to afford somebody to have a right to speak back to what's being put into a public domain. But the question is, how is that going to look under the streamline approach?
I can see why the aspiration is to take the approach that they want to be able to take. I think the concept that they're looking to bring to the table, as I understand it, I think it makes sense from an efficiency perspective. I think the CQC have been buckling under the pressure of workforce challenges. We're all struggling with them at the moment, and being able to regulate in a more productive way that's a great thing. There's an awful lot to be thankful for. I think one of my other concerns is the fact that anything new is going to take time to be able to perfect the approach. I mean, I'm a startup founder. My life is making mistakes and working out how to improve on those mistakes. It's just an inevitability of where we are as an organization. And trust me, we make plenty. But we I guess in our world, I think there's an appreciation for the fact that we're a startup and we're learning and we're trying to take on board as quickly as we can as we evolve. I think the thing that I think is kind of the biggest concern for me at this stage is that the care providers themselves might end up being the guinea pigs as part of that process. I'm sure that the end game with this will all be delighted once it's up and running and it's working effectively. It's that kind of there's a bit of a chasm in between those two worlds from where we are today to where we're headed. One of the conversations I was having with a handful of members the other day was the fact that we've almost had there's three phases of regulation that we have experienced, are experiencing, and are to experience. So we've got what was going on pre-COVID, we've got what happened during COVID and to date, and now we're kind of sat on the edge of what does this look like in the future? What's
next?
And there's quite distinct changes in the way that they've regulated in that period of time. And not surprisingly, it has been unnerving. Again, I want to kind of temper my what might sound as like taking a negative stance. I want the regulator to work fantastically. I think everyone wants to. Regulation so important. I guess it's just that transitional process. So in your mind, like, what do you think fundamentally the changes could mean for care providers, and what do you see as being the biggest risks, at least as we see it today?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, this is the lawyer in me, right? I just wish there was a solid process in place at this point. I fully appreciate that this change is a big one, and so the regulator can't just click their fingers and it happens. But I think the way in which this drip feeding kind of concept of what might be happening, I think is potentially creating more nerve than more excitement about what this might mean for a provider. I think in terms of the big changes, I mean, I've kind of already touched on this, that we may be expecting is basically the challenge process. So how we are going to be collaborating with the CQC in a way of CQC puts forward their perspective and a provider also gets to put forward their perspective. How is that process going to work in this new model or this new regulatory approach? Because it's critical if the CQC are wanting to work collaboratively and are wanting to be more efficient and are wanting to ensure that they are putting a positive and appropriate and accurate public opinion of a service out there, it's important that that collaboration allows a provider an equal amount of time to challenge what is being put forward. There have been general discussions in the sphere about potentially moving to a portal approach, potentially getting rid of what is now a factual accuracy process and putting it all streamlined electronically. Whether that means a word count, whether that doesn't, nobody knows. It's all very up in the air. So I think that is going to be the biggest change, alongside the fact that providers, more so than now, need to be very aware that they are constantly under watch. So they need to be prepared to provide a large amount of documentary evidence to show that they're reviewing their care documentation, for example, imminently. It needs to be provided then and there. They need to be aware that conversations that they're having with healthcare professionals may be somebody who in a day's time could be called by the CQC, and that person's commentary is going to be incorporated in an inspection at some point in time, in an inspection report, I should say. And I mean, I know providers are constantly in a state of wanting to put their best foot forward, but I think it just adds that extra element of, well, an inspection, a CQC arriving at our front door and saying, hey, we're here, isn't necessarily the start of what's going to be contained in that inspection report. It could have been going on for a week, a month, a couple of months prior. So I think that's the constant state of being inspected is something to also keep in the back of our minds.
So this is digital transformation in the social care sector, right? Mm-hmm. I speak both very passionately and very regularly about digital transformation in social care. It's going to be one of the most important things that happens in the world, more generally, but specifically in social care. And we've got a lot of catching up in comparison to an awful lot of other sectors and industries. But I think we're getting there. I think COVID has helped with that, but to a T, every single provider, every single technology company that I speak to about technological transformation doesn't start with tech, it starts with cultural transformation. And that's the bit that is so hard to get right. And loads of people do it really badly. Because it is difficult. We've implemented various different systems in the Care Leaders Network, which have worked amazingly well, and some of them we've just got wrong. We've got the wrong piece of tech. We've implemented it wrong. We've had to change things out. It's cost us loads of money. It's kind of a messy process, and it's an inevitability that's going to be the case. I think so. The providers have to be ready for that, but the CQC has to be ready for that as well. I've had conversations with people where they've had an inspector turn up and they say, right, show me your documents, fill in the blank, whatever it might be, and it's on Sequoia, or it's on Caring, or it's on any of the other great technology companies out there, PCS or Nourish, any of the kind of the key platforms out there. There's obviously a handful of others, but they're a tech-enabled company. And the inspector doesn't like technology. They hate it. So they get miffed because they haven't got that little room that they can go and sit in their office and go and unpack all of the pull all the ring binders off the shelf and go and thumb through all of the information. And what's fascinating about that is if that particular inspector isn't particularly tech savvy, usually if they can be left in a room and they ask for particular things, and they'll be kind of they'll be there kind of under their own steam going through the information. To my understanding, a lot of them don't like using the pieces of technology, and they don't like to be overseen and helped, because they feel like the provider might even be some way trying to manipulate the information so that they see the information that's correct rather than the information that might not be correct. And it kind of turns into, it creates a very strange set of circumstances. So I think if providers have to be ready for this, but the CQC has to be ready as well. And to my understanding, as it stands today, these are recent examples where I've heard kind of similar sets of circumstances to what I've just explained. It doesn't sound like they have that digital competency or proficiency as it stands today. And again, this might all change. It depends on how long it takes for this to roll out. They might have rigorous training programs in place, but I'm saying this to our audience and our members specifically to know that there's a certainly from the conversations that I've had, there's a reasonably high probability that it could well happen at some point. So bit of a red flag there, I guess, in my mind. And that cultural transformation takes time. Getting people aligned and pulling in the same direction is really, really hard. Again, and there's social care is massive, and there's lots of regulators out there, so it's a big job.
It's a big job. And to be fair and put credit where credit's due, I wouldn't want to be doing that job. I don't want to be that person changing the model, because it's not an easy beast to crack. I'm not saying that it doesn't need changing. Like we've already said, I think the principles that they're trying to put forward are sound and are very good. It's just, what is that going to look like in practice? And that's the IT aspect, that's the inspection aspect, that's how does a provider challenge, how much transparency is there, and if we are being collaborative, what does that actually mean? And those are questions that unfortunately are really exciting points of debate and discussion, which I think the majority of this chat has been, but they're not providing anybody with any answers at this point. So maybe someday soon, who knows, but we shall see.
I was going to say, my next point was going to be, okay, so are there any milestones? Are there any specific things that have been communicated at this stage where we've got some something we can kind of hang our hat on and say, update pending TBC for this particular date, or is it fairly still quite open-ended at the moment?
It's very open-ended at the moment. I think there was a game plan in place. They were starting with what they called early adopters in August 2022, which was just to essentially trial and error with a few providers. I have a feeling, and this is only based on discussions that have kind of been had around the office, that matters have gone back into discussion mode. So it's a matter where they've put it out there. There's obviously been some sessions and information dropped online. There's been a few videos produced by the CQC to try and explain what's been going on. And I think there's maybe been some feedback from the industry and the sector in general. And that's resulted in them kind of going back and having a think about some of those kinks that need ironing out. It's always going to happen. There's always going to be a back and forth process with something like this.
And this is, I mean, hopefully this is in the technology world. There's a concept called MVP. So it's minimum viable products. It's almost like create a prototype, take it to market, get some feedback, and then roll it out once you've kind of tightened up some of the kind of the key factors, and then you evolve in kind of an iterative process. The fact that they're looking to do kind of a bit of a test and measure and almost like an MVP kind of approach, that's good. I hope they learn what they need to learn as a result of that. And let's just wait and see how long that takes. I mean, I've heard on the grapevine, I don't know how much there's no way of being able to validate whether this is correct, but that August 2022 date, to my understanding, again, and this is grapevine type stuff, is that's been postponed until April 2023. But at the moment, again, that might be hearsay, but we'll just have to wait and see how that one plays out. So part of my question around that was, of course, to try and to be able to provide some level of hopefully kind of definition for people to say, look, this is when we expect to hear more. I was also going to say that's probably when we should catch up next and explore kind of what the set of circumstances looks like. But I guess this is an open-ended set of circumstances where if you do hear anything, or of course, if I hear anything as well, I'll be in touch and we'll try and get a conversation booked so that we can explore things in a bit more detail. But it's...
Yeah, please, definitely. I mean, it is ongoing, and that's the grapevine stuff is unfortunately where most people are hearing that information at the moment. And we often have phone calls with people going, oh, we've heard this is happening. How do we do it? What should we do? How do we fix it? The reality is it's all grapevine conversations at the moment that are going on. Even when CQC release information, we read it and we're left with more questions. So it's very much a patchwork process. I should also just briefly drop in there as well, Simon. They have released what they've called their scoring system, which is part of the assessment process for providers. So alongside the evidence categories, which basically help them formulate what we now know as an inspection report, whilst they're still planning on utilising the ratings that we know, so outstanding, good, inadequate, requires improvement, they are basically looking at doing a mathematical equation so that providers basically get a little bit more of an understanding as to how close they were to the next category.
Okay.
Which is quite nice when you think about it. It's like an exam, right? You got 80%, but you really needed to get 90%, and you were 10 away from getting there.
Sure.
At the moment, it's very hard to understand. That also might be because I am mathematically inept, but it's very much a aim at being a bit more transparent with where a provider has fallen on the CQC scale.
That's an interesting point. And I mean, hopefully they just use like a simple quartile system. So where are you kind of spread over 4 quartiles to know, are you at the top, middle, the bottom, middle, or the bottom of that individual inspection report, whether it be outstanding, good, requires improvement, or inadequate. I think that could be a really, really positive thing for predominantly for the teams as well. I mean, of course, it's great for the public, no doubt at all. But also as well, like if you've got a great service wherever you are, and you've got great aspirational people who want to drive that forward, knowing that you can see those incremental gains. We're human. We're driven by dopamine, and if we know that our collective effort as a team has even increased just by 1 quartile, guessing that's kind of the or whatever kind of percentage or kind of sub rating they kind of categorize that with, I think that could actually be really, really powerful. So in my mind, I think that sounds really positive. Again, the devil's going to be in the detail. How does that all work out? What does the mathematical equation like? Hopefully that they won't come to either of us for the algorithm on that one, because my maths isn't so good either. But
oh, terrible! I'm shocking.
If they can get that right, then hopefully that could be for as it stands at the moment, and I have yet to, of course, see kind of how that plays out. I think that could be a really positive thing, but maybe I'm missing glaringly obvious things, and people will message me afterwards and say, "No, Simon, you've missed this particular point, and this is what."
I mean, at the moment, there's no points to really have a big discussion about. They've just basically said, by the way, we're doing the scoring system, and at surface level, I 100% agree that it is nice to know where you stand. And I think it lends itself to the collaborative approach that they're aiming for, because it gives providers an insight into how close they are to being that outstanding service, for example. So it gives a tangible goal, and it gives people value in what they are doing versus just being chucked with a label and not knowing where you fall in the grand scheme of things. So again, it's a fantastic concept. It's really good in principle, but the devil is in the detail.
Well, let's catch up on some of those details as they arrive. I think that's probably the best thing to do. So I think for now, let's wrap up the conversation, but let's reconvene when we know more. So yeah, I guess for our members and the audience watching, we will endeavour to keep you posted. And obviously, if any of our members hear anything particularly that they think relevant to this conversation that they think that we should be having, obviously we'll create some content and share it with the community. But Samantha, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for your perspective today. It's been really helpful, and we will continue with the evolution of this conversation as it happens.
The ongoing conversation. Thank you so much, Simon. Wonderful to talk to you.